So in the 1960s, our speaker Terence was a student, like many of you, at UC Berkeley, and he left in the middle of things to go on a tour around the world for 7 years that ended in the deepest Amazon basin, where he had an experience that has determined his life in the 20 years following, and which is the subject of his latest book, True Hallucinations. So now in this historic moment, after all this time, Terence will ascend the platform of the University of California for the first time.
What I thought I would talk about when I was approached to do this, the pressure was to say something new, which is a heart-sinking pressure to a warhorse of the lecture circuit. I started out thinking I would never repeat myself and sometimes wonder if I'll ever have a new idea again. But what I wanted to talk about this evening was illusions. And I called the lecture The Taxonomy of Illusion, because I think it's interesting to attempt to classify and relate the various kinds of illusions that stand between us and that presupposed naked, radiant truth. that has more or less driven the engines of Western philosophy since Plato. Of course, the great victory of modernity is to disabuse ourselves of such naive notions, but they die hard, I think. Ralph mentioned my latest book, and I don't intend to talk about the book particularly, but in the book I quote the only piece of poetry in the whole thing, not written by me. I now see that I seem to have lost it. Oh no, here it comes up. But it relates to this on many, many levels, this question of illusion and the relationship of the self to the real and where the world falls in that equation and the limits of knowledge and all that other good psychedelic stuff that needs to be considered. The quote is from Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, and if you don't know this book, you should. It is without doubt one of the funniest books in the English language, and it takes the form of a very long poem and then the commentary upon this poem. The poem is written by a character that Nabokov creates named John Shade, and the part that I want to call to your attention this evening runs like this. That rare phenomenon, the iridule, when, beautiful and strange, in a bright sky above a mountain range, one opal cloudlet in an oval form reflects the rainbow of a thunderstorm which in a distant valley has been staged, for we are most artistically caged. Now, this is a very strange piece of poetry. This is not like even Wallace Stevens at his most obscure. In the first place, this word, the iridule, you won't find this word in any dictionary, and yet I sensed that this is obviously the word for this phenomenon. I know what he's talking about. I have seen this opal cloudlet in an oval form which reflects the rainbow of a thunderstorm in a distant place. We're in the realm of mirage, and nature as mirage, and nature as mirrored labyrinth. And then the final point, and I'll go through all this in the course of talking to you. But the final line about being artistically caged, this is, I think, where the psychedelics come in. Because psychedelics allow one to pierce beyond the veil of cultural illusion, beyond the linguistic momentum of what has been handed on. The faith of Tantra and magic and psychedelics is that the apparent intransigent appearance of the world can somehow be overcome by an act of magic. I used to collect Tibetan thangkas, and the texts which go with some of these thangkas, I remember one in particular which, coming out of the Tibetan, the translation was, all things being reversed, the great Hla, the great God, appears instantly. You see, the precondition for magic is the reversal of causality somehow. And as moderns, we have grown to give great credence, I think, to the idea that the world is largely a linguistic structure, largely created through the participation of the observer. But we have not been able to take that perception and turn it into a technology. Instead, we are still driven by the blind momentum of atomic structure. Who was it who said the atoms blindly run? And then I think it was Whitehead who said, yes, but within the body they blindly run according to the body's plan. You see, what I think we're dealing with are patterns and then the indeterminate dimensions between patterns. And it's in those indeterminate places, within the interstices of reality, that the observer is able to establish him or herself and then model back the world. The reason I wanted to talk about a taxonomy of illusion was because I thought it was important to relate the various styles of hyper-seeing, non-seeing, and mis-seeing together, because I think that the heuristic consequences of doing that are to realize just how shifting the sands are upon which the ontological edifice of Western thinking rests. I mean, that's always the point, you see, to deconstruct Western civilization, because Western civilization, the toxic consequences are now clear for everyone to see. So the first category or grand family of illusions which we would put into our taxonomic key would be social illusions. And when later we can argue this, but at this point in the discussion, illusion is / delusion. So the great social illusions, delusions, are sexism, racism, xenophobia, egoism, classism. The world is riddled and ruled by these social illusions, and no one is free of them. And so they constitute one broad category. I might just mention as an aside, a book which was very influential on me, and I never heard anybody else ever mention it, was a book by Rockcliffe called Illusions and Delusions of the Supernatural and the Occult.